What's the latest?
Well, it's interesting looking at this resignation letter. It doesn't itself talk about groping. That is news that we learnt after we learnt of that.
Is it confirmed or is it allegations?
These are allegations, but they're widely reported allegations, and it would be odd for Chris Pincher himself to allude specifically to what he was accused of in his resignation letter. So there's those two parts there. One of the interesting political sides of this is that the government initially, a source within Number 10, put out a statement saying that Chris Pincher has done the right thing by resigning. He has acknowledged his culpability. He has, and that should, to some extent, be the end of the matter. Now, that did not go down that well last night. And this morning, we've seen the government backtracking a little bit there because, of course, there have been calls for investigations, whether police investigations or whether internal parliamentary investigations. Initially, the government said, well, look, he's done the right thing. He acknowledged he got too drunk and he acknowledged wrongdoing. But on the other hand, this is more than just wrongdoing. This is sexual assault that has been alleged. And to some extent, we've seen members of Parliament lose the whip for less. So if we look back to the by-elections that just took place on the 23rd of June, one of those by-elections was for a member of Parliament who had watched pornography in the House of Commons twice. Now, is watching pornography in the House of Commons, grim though it is that a greater or a lesser offence than allegedly groping two individuals?
Well, this is it, isn't
question.
it? This is it. I mean, it's a low bar, isn't it? But we have to ask these questions. It's not the first time he's had to resign, though, is it?
This is true. Back in 2017...
What was that for?
Back in 2017, he faced allegations. Now, it must be said that these allegations were investigated and I believe he was cleared after those investigations. But clearly there had been questions beforehand and he then became a housing minister and then Deputy Chief Whip just in the most recent reshuffle. But clearly what's going on now is bigger discussion around the culture of Westminster as a whole, because this is not the first sexual assault allegation we've heard in this Parliament. Indeed, we saw the SNP MP, Patrick Grady, had allegations against him. We saw, of course, those two by-elections after one conviction of Imran Ahmed Khan, the Conservative MP for Wakefield, who resigned after being convicted for child sexual assault.
Yes,
we had, of course, the Tiverton by-election as well after the impropriety of watching pornography in the House of Commons. We've just... And, of course, there's the anonymous Member of Parliament who has been told to stay away from Parliament, who has yet to be charged but was arrested on suspicion of rape. So this is really quite serious in terms of the sheer number there. Although, on the other hand, what some MPs will say is there are 650 members of Parliament. You could name a handful that have done things wrong, although it does seem like a pretty high proportion in the context of everything.
Look, it does. Of course it does. And now I'm just having a look. Sorry, Tom, she kind of was speaking to Void there for a second, because I was looking on my laptop here at the Carlton Club. Now, I've been. I'm sure you have as well. And, you know, it's a relatively exclusive place, I suppose, you know. And is it saying more about the culture at the Carlton Club than it does about Parliament?
Well, it's really interesting looking at what happened with the Carlton Club during the pandemic. Many members of Parliament, particularly a lot of the new members of Parliament, Conservatives, this is Carlton Club, it goes back a long time being the club of the Conservative Party. In fact, the 1922 committee was founded off the back of a meeting that was held in the Carlton Club. This is the history of the Conservative Party in a gentleman's club. And to some extent, this became a more significant venue during the pandemic because all the bars in Westminster were closed or restricted. And what you found was a lot of members of Parliament made the short trip across St James's Park to go to the Carlton Club instead. And on many evenings, if there aren't votes that MPs have to get to very quickly, they would much rather drink in the Carlton Club than in Parliament because of all of the scandal that has gone on in and around Parliament and, of course, some of the restrictions there as well. So potentially what we're seeing there is just a shift of what's gone on, away from Strangers Bar and towards the Carlton Club.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out... Now, look, obviously, certainly would never want to make lights of... Indeed, I'm not making lights of any kind of, sexual impropriety or anything like that whatsoever. But I'm trying to figure out whether or not there's a disproportionate number of people in Parliament who do this kind of thing, or whether it's a reflection of how many people in wider society do this kind of thing. I suppose there's almost no answer to that, really, is it?
It's a really hard question to ask. Of course, there's a greater spotlight on members of Parliament. It's hard to know what exactly goes on in wider society without that same spotlight. Of course, we do hear so often about the media, about... about senior society, people who are running companies.
People in the top of the city. I mean,
we do hear a lot about other sectors as well. I've worked in politics, I've worked in journalism, I've worked in media in this sphere for as long as I've worked in London. It's not perhaps for me to compare other industries, but you do, of course, hear stories about what goes on at Christmas parties, what goes on elsewhere, that perhaps what's going on in Parliament is reflective of wider society. And that's a horrible thing to say. It's a really horrible thing to say. But it is a valid question to ask. Is this a problem with our politics or a problem with our culture more widely?